This is SEAL camp, not a hospital infirmary. A drill instructor barked as Rachel Moore walked into camp with a medical bag slung over her shoulder. A recruit sneered. She only knows how to tape blisters. Maybe she can carry an IV bag at most. Another tossed her a box of medicine and said coldly, "Clean up the blood and trash, nurse." Rachel didn't reply, quietly arranging the infirmary. But no one knew the woman they had just looked down on would leave every recruit speechless when they saw her take down an armed intruder in just a few seconds. Rachel stood there, her faded medical blouse hanging loose on her slim frame, old military pants scuffed at the knees, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She didn't look like much. No makeup, no flash, just a calm face that didn't beg for attention. The recruits, all muscle and bravado, sized her up in seconds. To them, she was just a civilian nurse, probably some local hire who'd never seen a real fight. They didn't know her story. They didn't know she'd carried more than IV bags in her life. Carried lives, carried secrets, carried scars. But that first day as she unpacked bandages and checked supplies, all they saw was someone who didn't belong. The desert sun beat down on the isolated base, a sprawl of dusty tents and concrete bunkers. SEAL training camp wasn't a place for soft hands or weak nerves. The recruits were young, mostly in their early 20s, their egos as sharp as the knives they carried. They'd been through weeks of grueling drills, their bodies hardened, their minds sharpened to a point. Rachel at 29 looked out of place to them. Too quiet, too plain. Her medical bag slung over one shoulder looked like it had seen better days, faded canvas, a few frayed stitches. One recruit, a broad-shouldered guy with a buzz cut and a smirk, leaned against the infirmary door. "Hey, nurse," he called, loud enough for his buddies to hear. "Don't trip over your stethoscope out here. This ain't a clinic." Laughter rippled through the group. Rachel kept her eyes on the shelf. She was organizing her hands steady, not even a flinch. During lunch that day, Rachel sat alone at the edge of the mess hall, her tray of food barely touched. A group of recruits at a nearby table didn't bother lowering their voices. "Look at her," one said, a wiry guy with a scar over his eyebrow. "Bet she's never even held a gun. Probably cries if she breaks a nail." His friends chuckled, forks clinking against plates. Another, a stocky recruit with a loud voice, leaned back in his chair. Why's she even here? They could have sent a real medic, not some wannabe nurse. Rachel's hand paused over her water glass, her fingers tightening just slightly. She took a slow sip, set the glass down, and kept eating. The recruits didn't notice her glance their way, brief but piercing, like she was memorizing their faces. The mess hall buzzed around her, but she stayed quiet, her solitude louder than their taunts. She didn't owe them an explanation. That was the thing about Rachel, she never explained herself, never raised her voice, never tried to prove a point. But her silence wasn't weakness. It was something else, something heavier. The recruits didn't see it. They just saw a woman who didn't fit their idea of power. Another guy, wiry and loud, tossed a roll of gauze her way. It landed at her feet. "Pick that up, nurse. Gotta keep the place tidy." His tone was sharp, like he was daring her to snap back. She didn't. She bent down, picked up the gauze, and set it neatly on the counter. Her face didn't change. But her eyes, dark steady, caught his for a split second, and he looked away first. The drill instructor, a man with a voice like gravel and a chest like a barrel, didn't help. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the recruits hassle her. "This is a training ground for warriors," he said, his words aimed at Rachel, but loud enough for everyone. "You're here to patch up cuts and hand out aspirin. Don't get in the way of real work." The recruit snickered, feeding off his tone. Rachel nodded once like she was agreeing, but her hands kept moving, organizing syringes, checking vials, setting up her space. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to do her job. But the weight of their words hung in the air, heavy as the desert heat. Late that afternoon, Rachel was called to treat a recruit who'd twisted his ankle during a run. The guy, a cocky kid named Lucas with a permanent grin, sat on the infirmary cot, his leg propped up. "Hurry it up, nurse," he said, snapping his fingers like she was a waitress. "I got better things to do than sit here." His buddy, leaning against the wall, laughed. "Yeah, don't mess up his ankle. He's got to carry us in the next drill." Rachel knelt beside Lucas, her hands gentle but firm, as she wrapped the ankle. Lucas kept talking, his voice loud. "Bet you're used to this, huh? Cleaning up after real fighters." Rachel finished the wrap, securing it with tape. She stood, looked him in the eye, and said, "Stay off it for 2 days, or you'll be limping for a month." Her tone was flat, but it shut him up. His grin faded and he didn't snap his fingers again. That night, Rachel sat alone in the infirmary, the only light coming from a small lamp on her desk. She opened her bag and pulled out a worn photo creased at the edges. It showed a younger Rachel, maybe 22, in combat gear, standing next to a group of soldiers in some far-off place. Her face was younger, but just as calm, just as steady. She looked at the photo for a long moment, then slid it back into her bag. Outside, the recruits were shouting running drills under floodlights. Their voices carried through the thin walls full of confidence and mockery. She didn't react. She just zipped her bag shut and went back to work. The next morning, the camp was alive with chaos. A 2-kilometer swim drill was underway, the recruits battling choppy water in a man-made lake near the base. Rachel stood on the shore, her medical bag at her feet, watching. The instructors were barking orders, timing the recruits as they fought through the waves. One recruit, a lanky kid named Tyler, started to falter halfway across. His strokes grew sloppy, his head dipping under the water. The instructor on the bank didn't move, just watched with a stopwatch in hand. Tyler went under again, longer this time. The other recruits didn't notice they were too focused on their own times. Rachel didn't hesitate. She kicked off her boots, dropped her bag, and dove into the water. The recruits on the shore froze, some laughing, thinking she was overreacting. "What's she doing?" one muttered, "Playing lifeguard." But Rachel cut through the water like she'd done it 1,000 times. She reached Tyler in seconds, her arm hooking under his jaw, with precision pulling his head above the surface. She swam him back to shore, her movement smooth, mechanical, like she'd been trained for this. On the bank, she tilted his head, pressed his chest, and forced water out of his lungs. Tyler coughed, vomited water, and gasped for air. He was alive. As Rachel stood, water dripping from her clothes, a recruit named Jenna with sharp eyes and a fake smile clapped slowly from the sidelines. "Wow, nurse, you're a regular hero," she said, her voice sugary but sharp. "Bet you practiced that in nursing school." The others snickered, but it was uneasy. Rachel didn't respond. She just grabbed her bag and started walking back to the infirmary, her wet boots squelching in the sand. Tyler, still catching his breath, watched her go, his face a mix of gratitude and confusion. Jenna's smile faltered when Rachel didn't look back, her sarcasm falling flat in the heavy air. The instructor, the same one who'd barked at her yesterday, stared. His stopwatch was still in his hand, forgotten. "Where the hell did you learn that?" he asked, his voice low, almost suspicious. Rachel wiped her hands on her pants, her breath steady despite the swim. "Old habit," she said. "Nothing more." The recruits were quiet now, their smirks gone. Tyler, still coughing, looked up at her, his face pale. "Thanks," he mumbled. Rachel just nodded and picked up her bag. The other recruits exchanged glances, unsure what to make of her. But the whispers started quiet at first, spreading through the group like wildfire. "Hey, before we go on, if this story's hitting you, maybe reminding you of a time you were underestimated or pushed aside, could you do me a favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep sharing stories like this, stories about people who rise above the noise. Just a quick pause, then we'll keep going." Back at the camp, the recruits didn't let up. If anything, Rachel's save made some of them double down. They didn't like being shown up, especially not by a nurse. During a break, a tall recruit named Derek, all swagger and sharp cheekbones, sauntered over to the infirmary. He leaned in too close, and threw a fake punch, stopping an inch from her face. "What happens if you get taken hostage, nurse?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. His buddies laughed, egging him on. "Bet she'd just faint," one said, "or cry for help." Derek grinned, reaching for her shoulder like he was testing her. "You probably fight worse than my sister doing yoga." Rachel didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on his, steady and cold. When his hand grazed her shoulder, she moved fast. Her wrist twisted, catching his arm in a lock so tight he gasped. In one smooth motion, she pivoted and slammed him to the ground. Derek hit the dirt hard, his arm pinned, his face twisted in pain. The laughter stopped. His friends stood there, mouths open, not daring to move. Rachel held the lock for a second longer, then let go. She stood up, brushed the dust off her hands, and picked up her medical bag. "Don't touch me again," she said, her voice even. "I don't want to hurt anyone worse." Derek scrambled to his feet, his face red, his pride bruised more than his arm. The next day, during a weapons maintenance session, Rachel passed by the recruits cleaning their rifles under a tent. One of them, a guy named Mark with a loud laugh and a chip on his shoulder, called out, "Hey nurse, stick to your bandages. Guns are for the big boys." His friends howled, slapping the table. Rachel paused, her bag over her shoulder, and glanced at the rifle Mark was holding. "Your bolt's misaligned. she said, her voice quiet but clear. Fix it or it'll jam. Mark's laugh died in his throat. He checked the rifle, his fingers fumbling, and sure enough, the bolt was off. His friends went quiet, their eyes darting between him and Rachel. She didn't wait for a response, just kept walking her steps, steady, leaving Mark red-faced and silent. The instructor, watching from a distance, didn't say a word. His eyes narrowed, though, like he was piecing something together. Rachel went back to her work, checking supplies, ignoring the stares. The recruits whispered now, that their voices lower, less sure. "Who is she?" one asked. "No nurse moves like that." Another shook his head. "She got lucky." "That's all." But the doubt was there, creeping in. Rachel didn't care. She kept her head down, her hands busy like nothing had happened. But something had shifted. The camp wasn't laughing as easily anymore. That evening, Rachel was restocking the infirmary when a recruit named Sarah, quiet and usually unnoticed, slipped in with a cut on her hand from a training mishap. As Rachel cleaned the wound, Sarah hesitated, then spoke. "They're wrong about you," she said softly. "I saw what you did for Tyler. You're not just a nurse." Rachel's hands didn't pause, but her eyes flicked up, meeting Sarah's for a moment. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just finished bandaging the cut. "Keep it dry," she said, handing Sarah a small pack of gauze. Sarah lingered like she wanted to say more, but Rachel turned back to her supplies, her silence a wall. Sarah left, but her words hung in the air, a rare crack in the camp's hostility. That night, a simulated alert drill kicked off. Sirens blared and recruits scrambled to their positions, grabbing rifles and moving in formation. Rachel stayed in the infirmary as ordered. The drill instructor, the same one who'd dismissed her on day one, stuck his head in. "Stay put, nurse," he said, his tone sharp. "This is no place for you. Keep the door locked and don't wander." A recruit passing by smirked, whispering to his friend, "When real danger comes, she'll be the first to run." Another knocked on the infirmary door, mocking her. "Lock it tight, nurse. Don't want you getting taken hostage." The word stung, but Rachel didn't react. She just locked the door and stood by the window, watching the recruits move under the floodlights. Then it happened. A real crash, not part of the drill. Glass shattered in the back of the infirmary, and a man burst through dressed in dark clothes, a gun in his hand. He wasn't a recruit. He wasn't part of the camp. Rachel didn't scream, didn't freeze. She moved like lightning, closing the distance before he could aim. Her hand locked onto his wrist, twisting until the gun was useless. With her other hand, she drove her elbow into his arm, hard. The crack of his bone echoed in the small room. He screamed, dropping to his knees. Rachel didn't stop. She grabbed a scalpel from the tray and stabbed it into his shoulder joint, pinning him. Then she tied his wrists with IV tubing, tight enough to hold. She grabbed the radio from her desk. "There's a real intruder," she said, her voice calm like she was reading a grocery list. "I've secured one." When security burst in, they stopped dead. Rachel was kneeling on the man's back, the confiscated gun pressed to his neck. The intruder was groaning, blood pooling under his shoulder. The security team stared, their rifles half raised, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Rachel stood up, handed the gun to the nearest guard, and went back to her desk. "He needs medical attention," she said, already pulling out gauze. Right after the incident, as security dragged the intruder away, a recruit named Ethan, known for his quick wit and sharper tongue, lingered outside the infirmary. "Guess you got a good swing, nurse," he said, his voice loud enough to draw a crowd. "But one lucky takedown doesn't make you one of us." He crossed his arms, smirking, waiting for her to bite. Rachel was cleaning the scalpel in the sink, her back to him. She didn't turn around, just kept scrubbing the water running red. Ethan's smirk wavered, but he pressed on. "What's next, huh?" "Gonna try out for the team." The other recruits shifted uncomfortably, sensing the line he was crossing. Rachel set the scalpel down, dried her hands, and finally faced him. "I'm not here to play your games," she said, her voice low, each word deliberate. Ethan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She walked past him, her bag over her shoulder, and the crowd parted without a word. The camp was buzzing by morning. Recruits gathered outside the infirmary, their voices a mix of shock and disbelief. The nurse took down an armed guy. One said, his eyes wide, "No way. She's just a nurse." Another, a cocky kid with a fresh tattoo, laughed it off. "Probably just lucky. We're the soldiers here, not her." A third, the loudmouth from the first day, tried to play it cool. "Congrats, nurse. You'll have your own movie now." His friends snickered, but it was forced. The confidence was cracking. Rachel didn't respond. She washed the blood off her hands in the sink, her movement slow and deliberate, then went back to handing out bandages. Later that day, during a routine inventory check, an instructor named Harris Gruff but Fair noticed a discrepancy in the medical logs. He confronted Rachel in the infirmary, his voice low but firm. "These numbers don't add up. You're using supplies faster than you should." The accusation hung heavy, implying carelessness or worse. A few recruits nearby perked up, smirking, sensing a chance to see her falter. Rachel didn't blink. She pulled a notebook from her bag, its pages filled with neat handwriting, and handed it to Harris. "Every syringe, every bandage accounted for," she said, pointing to the dates. "Check the trauma kits I restocked after the swim drill." Harris flipped through the pages, his frown deepening, then softening. He nodded, handed the notebook back, and walked out. The recruits' smirks faded, their whispers cut short by the weight of her precision. Behind the scenes, the camp commander was on the phone with HQ. He'd seen the security footage, seen Rachel move like she'd been trained for war. "Who is she?" he demanded. The voice on the other end paused, then answered. "Rachel Moore, Combat Medic, Ghost Viper Unit." Her records were erased 5 years ago. The commander's face went pale. "Ghost Viper," he muttered. "Oh, they're taking this vacant." The unit with a 1% survival rate. He hung up, staring at the infirmary across the camp. The news spread fast. By noon, every recruit knew. Ghost Viper. The name carried weight like a ghost story told around a campfire. No one looked at Rachel the same way after that. The following morning, Rachel was checking a recruit's stitches when a loud argument broke out nearby. 2 recruits, Carter and another named Vince, were shoving each other over a botched drill, their voices carrying across the camp. "You're useless, man." Carter spat, his face red. Vince shoved back, nearly knocking over a crate of supplies. Rachel stepped out, her voice cutting through the noise. "Enough!" They froze, surprised by her tone, not loud, but unyielding. She pointed to the crate. "Fix it, then take it to the storage tent." Carter scoffed, but Vince hesitated, then nodded. They righted the crate and carried it off, their argument forgotten. The other recruits watching exchanged looks, the air thick with a new kind of respect. But some recruits couldn't let it go. Their pride was wounded, their egos bruised. During a medical check later that day, a young recruit named Carter, all sharp jawline and sharper attitude, muttered under his breath. "She might have been good once, but that's in the past. Ghost Viper's gone. She's just a washed-up veteran now." His friend, a stocky guy with a loud laugh, chimed in. "Yeah, what can she even do now? Hand out pills." They smirked, thinking Rachel didn't hear. She did. Her hand paused over a bottle of antiseptic, but she didn't turn around. The instructor beside her heard everything but stayed silent, his eyes flicking to Rachel, waiting for her reaction. She didn't give one. That afternoon, during a navigation drill, a recruit named Paul got lost in the desert, his radio dead. The instructors were organizing a search when Rachel stepped forward of her bag already packed. "I'll find him," she said, her voice steady. The lead instructor, skeptical, hesitated but nodded. Rachel studied the map for 10 seconds, then headed out alone. 2 hours later, she returned with Paul dehydrated but alive, his arm slung over her shoulder. The recruits watched silent as she handed him off to the med team. Paul, catching his breath, muttered, "She knew exactly where I was, like she had tracked me before." The instructor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Rachel just walked back to the infirmary, her boots kicking up dust. That night, the camp went dark. Not a drill, a real attack. Enemy commandos hit the base fast and coordinated. Explosions lit up the night, and gunfire cracked through the air. The commander was hit in the first wave, a bullet grazing his leg, leaving him bleeding in the command tent. Communications were cut, radios dead. The recruits froze, their training forgotten in the chaos. Shouts filled the air, but no one knew what to do. Rachel stepped out of the infirmary, her medical bag over her shoulder, her face calm as ever. She didn't hesitate. "You 3, she said, pointing to a group of recruits huddled near a bunker. "Grab rifles, cover the east gate." "Move!" Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the panic like a knife. They obeyed without thinking. She divided the rest into groups, her orders sharp and clear: crossfire points, defensive lines, medevac for the wounded. She moved like she had done this before, like she had lived it. She led a small team herself, slipping through the shadows to flank the attackers. In 30 minutes, the enemy was down, every last one. When the smoke cleared, the recruit stood in stunned silence. Rachel was kneeling by the commander, bandaging his leg with steady hands. The camp was a mess, bullet casings, scattered tents smoldering, but it was standing. Because of her. No one called her nurse anymore. They didn't know what to call her. She didn't care. She finished the bandage, stood up, and walked back to the infirmary, her bag slung over her shoulder like always. The next day, as the camp began to recover, a recruit named Greg, known for his flashy gear and louder ego, posted a video online mocking Rachel's role in the attack. "Nurse playing soldier," he captioned it, showing her bandaging the commander. By noon, the video was gone, deleted after HQ intervened. Greg was called to the commander's tent, his face pale when he returned. His gear was packed. By evening, his slot in the program revoked. The other recruits saw it happen, their phones suddenly quiet, their bravado checked. Rachel didn't comment. She just kept working, her hands steady, her silence louder than any post. The fallout came fast. Carter, the recruit who'd called her washed up, was dropped from the program the next day. His attitude had been noted one too many times, and the commander wasn't forgiving. The loudmouth from the first day, the one who'd tossed the gauze, got a public dressing down from the instructor, his face burning as his peers watched. Derek, the guy who'd tried to intimidate her, lost his shot at a leadership role. His name was crossed off the list without explanation. Whispers spread online. 2 recruits posting about the nurse who wasn't a nurse. One post went viral, a grainy video of Rachel taking down the intruder. The comments were brutal, some mocking the recruits who'd underestimated her, others praising her like a legend. Rachel didn't check her phone. She didn't read the posts. She just kept working, handing out bandages, checking vitals, her face as calm as ever. But something had changed. When she walked through the camp, now, heads turned. Not with mockery, with respect. With questions. With a little fear. She didn't need their approval. She never had. But the truth was out, and it was heavy. Then her husband arrived. He didn't announce himself. Didn't make a scene. He just walked into the camp one morning, a tall man in a plain jacket, his face hard but quiet. The recruits knew him the second he stepped through the gate. General Michael Moore. His name wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. The air changed. The instructor straightened up. Derek looked at the ground. Carter, still packing his bags, froze. The loudmouth recruit turned away, suddenly interested in his boots. Rachel stood by the infirmary door, her bag over her shoulder, watching him approach. She didn't smile, didn't run to him. She just nodded like they had planned this all along. He stopped in front of her, his eyes soft for a moment. "You good?" he asked, his voice low. "Always," she said. That was it. No speeches, no drama. He put a hand on her shoulder, and they walked out together. The recruits watched in silence, their jokes long gone. Rachel didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her steps were steady, her bag swaying lightly against her hip. The camp would talk about her for years, not as a nurse, as Rachel Moore. On their way out, a young recruit, barely 19, stood by the gate, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He'd been quiet the whole time, watching Rachel from a distance. As she passed, he stepped forward, his voice shaky but clear. "Ma'am," he said, "thank you for everything." Rachel paused, her eyes meeting his. She didn't speak, just gave a small nod, her face unreadable but kind. The recruit stepped back, his shoulders straighter, like her acknowledgement meant more than any medal. Michael glanced at her, a faint smile on his lips, but said nothing. They kept walking, the desert stretching out before them. She'd been judged her whole life, looked down on, dismissed, mocked for how she dressed, how she spoke, how she carried herself. But she never let it break her. She carried her truth quietly, like a weight she'd learned to balance. And in the end, that truth was enough. It always had been. The camp learned it the hard way. So did everyone who'd laughed. What are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.